Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is one of my European nightcrawler bins. It's the younger of my two European nightcrawler bins, and it's been 8 days since we fed it. The last time I came down here to feed my two European nightcrawler bins, we started with the older one. Today we're starting with the younger one. And what I've got here is just a variety of different kitchen scraps to give them. Besides the coffee plus the filter, you've got some, I think it's squash peels, some potato peels, chunks of strawberry, and some soiled paper towels to go in as bedding. Since these bins are now both over 100 days old, for quite some time now, for at least a couple feedings, I've been really trying to go with materials that I feel are going to break down pretty quickly. So certain things that I've been withholding are stuff that I do commonly use, but not in my older bins. Stuff like the leaves that I bring in from outside. So you'll see lots of leaves, but with each leaf comes its stem. And it's the stems that I always feel like are going to hold me back from possibly harvesting a nearly finished container of vermicompost. So to help avoid having a bunch of little sticks and stems in my finished compost, I usually cease the use of leaves in my bins somewhere around day 100. And let's see now, this being the younger is 103 days old. The other bin a little bit older, just 1 week older. If I'm not mistaken, this might be at feeding number 10 or 11. And I think the other bin might be at feeding 13 or something like that. I was looking at my tracking spreadsheet quickly just to see where things stand with these bins. Somehow those numbers ring a bell. I'm trying to also think about what also rings a bell from the last feeding. One thing that rings a bell is the avocados. And I can't remember which bin it was in, but there were avocados that we kept bumping into inside one of these bins. And after many, many weeks of constantly running into this one avocado that's still whole, was never opened up or cut open, I believe that one thing we had set out to do the next time we check in was to actually break that thing open to maybe, help it break down a little more quickly. So I'm not sure if it's in here that we're going to bump into it or in the other bin, but if we find a whole avocado, we're going to break it finally. Oh, is this it? I think it is. And it feels so weird. It feels kind of light, and it feels almost like if I squeeze it a little bit, the inside feels almost partially hollow. And I guess that makes sense if there's worms inside of it eating it. This little guy made, a real beeline out of there for whatever reason. Doesn't seem to like the fact that I'm intruding on his space or her space. Or I guess in the case of a worm, it's both, right? It's not him or her, it's probably both. So just really quick, since this was the mission for this particular bin, to finally have its avocado cracked open, let's take a look at how this thing's progressing. I've always been so curious about this, whether it's going to be mobbed with worms, how the pit inside is doing. So you could see a number of worms occupying the inside of this thing, nibbling away at the contents. And as you work your way in, you eventually come across the pit. And an avocado pit, if you've ever handled one, is a really tough material. And I always use that as, oh, how do you like that? I use the progress that the pit is making as a measure to see how I'm doing. And I'm always curious to see if I'm able to crack one of these things open with just my fingers. And it does seem like I was able to at least chip a piece of it off. I mean, granted, it's a little bit awkward doing this single-handed, because I do like to keep one hand clean for manipulating my camera and just to have a clean hand just in case I need it in a pinch. But with all the practice I've given myself over the years, always working in my worm bins with one glove and one hand, I'm getting pretty good at it, I believe. And here's a pretty good chunk of the inside of the avocado that I'm surprised hasn't really broken down much. So my hope is that by exposing all this stuff a little bit better than it being, sealed inside of its shell, that hopefully it'll start to help it break down a little bit more rapidly than if we left it. So that was just one of my to-dos for today, in this bin at least. I don't really recall if there was any sort of a to-do to get done in the other bin. So let's grab all this leftover food type stuff that we found along the way here and pile it up so that when we get the feeding zone replenished with new stuff, we can drop those things right in there alongside the new food. This bin definitely has lots and lots of these leaf stems in it, doesn't it? Even though it's been quite a number of feedings since the last time we added fresh leaves. And I don't remember how long it's been now, but it's been at least a couple weeks. So I'm kind of glad that I've been withholding the application of fresh dry leaves into this bin so that we can start seeing the existing ones break down and that we're not left with a whole bunch of leaf stems in here. I am kind of digging all the way to the bottom of the feeding area. I'm just out of curiosity to see what kind of leftovers there might be in here. Here we go. I knew there was another slow composting item in here other than the avocado, and this is a mango seed. This mango seed has been breached, so there are worms inside of it, crawling in and out of it. This thing, you know, I'll continue to try to crack this thing open further and further, but it's pretty tough still, so I'm not going to bother. Alright, I got to be careful here. I got a little attempt at an escape. This is the only thing I don't like when I'm starting to get this high up into the bin, is that a lot of the material I've pushed up is right at the rim. And for a worm to climb up to the edge and possibly squirm out of the container could happen pretty quickly. So I've got to be vigilant, make sure it doesn't happen. So let's get this feeding done. Enough playing around and bothering the poor worms. Let's let them get back to their job of breaking down my kitchen scraps. So let's see here. I'm going to grab, I guess, what appears to be about half of these paper towels. Here's one, here's two. I don't know exactly how many there are, but we're going to chunk up these paper towel bits and drop them in as kind of the foundation for today's feeding. Here we have a couple more. Alright, let's give them one more here, and we'll give slightly less to the older bin, since this bin's going to have possibly a week extra time to break down what it's been given. Okay, so here we have the yummy foods that they're going to be given, and I'll just try to divvy up the portion to be kind of equal. I guess the other thing I didn't really notice in here, which I think I also saw when I was reviewing last feedings video of these bins, is that each bin I thought had received sort of the stump end or the butt end of a head of cauliflower or some other sort of vegetable along those lines. And I think I even predicted it during that last feeding, was that, you know, even those things are kind of a big chunk of material, they always seem to go pretty quickly. I mean, I freeze all my foods, or most of my foods that are going to the worms. Obviously I'm not freezing the coffee, but all the fruits and veggies I feed are for the most part frozen, which probably helps a lot with the breakdown of the material. As it thaws, it gets all mushy and the worms can gobble it right up. So that's probably one of the reasons you don't really find that sort of stuff as leftovers usually. But I thought I might try to see if I can bump into that as I was checking out the bin today during today's feeding. But so far I haven't seen it, and we might not even see it. It could have possibly been consumed already. But we'll cover up here slowly and see if we can find it. Maybe it won't turn up, and that's fine. That is the whole object of the game here, right? That they break everything down that they're given. But sometimes I'm just curious to see how certain larger sized objects are going to progress within the bin. And that was just one of the things I was curious to see, how it progresses between now and the last time we were in here. 8 days, 8 days between the last feeding not being very large, and with that being a kind of material that probably would get mushy and easy to eat pretty quickly, it's not a surprise that we're not seeing it in here. So this bin's doing pretty nice. 103 days of age. The only thing that concerns me, as I mentioned earlier, is the overall volume of the container being so high up within the bin. It just becomes a little bit more difficult to work, especially since I like to push stuff off to the sides. I just worry about possibly giving worms an easy out and then them ending up somewhere on my table, drying out, which is the last thing I want to have happen to my poor worms. So we're going to cover up here and go get the other bin. Okay, now this is the 110-day-old bin. If memory serves me correctly, it's the older bin, this one, that we believe has a slightly larger population. I know that in my tracking spreadsheet, once in a while I show my tracking spreadsheet, and for anyone that's been paying really close attention, they both have the estimated population of 1,000 worms listed in my tracker. But I really don't think that that's the case. I do somehow feel that this bin is slightly more heavily populated, and as a result of that, it's probably a little bit more capable of breaking down more stuff more quickly than the other bin. And you can also see that even though it's just only a week older, it is probably a lot more mature in terms of the quality of the material. You don't have to go through much of this topping material. You scrape away some of this top leaf cover and you're right down into material that looks almost like pure castings at this point. And I'm sure there's a lot of stuff mixed in here. This is like the stem of some sort of a veggie. I'm sure if we start probing around where we last fed, we'll bump into various older food items. Here's another mango pit, mango seed. I usually try not to disrupt what's going on here in terms of the worms accessing the seed that's inside the husk. But I'm questioning whether this one even has that anymore. It might just be the husk anymore. This one's pretty far gone. I'm wondering what other sort of leftovers we might bump into in here. Alright, I'm seeing some of the remnants of bedding from the previous feedings. I think in the previous feedings we were using a lot of shredded newspaper. Here's a chunk of corn cob. So there's little bits and pieces of older feedings in here, another mango seed. But mostly the stuff we're seeing are things that are slow composting items that are going to always be expected to take a little bit longer to break down. Corn cob, definitely a slow composting item. Mango seeds, obviously a slow composting item. And I think right away too, you can sort of see just from the amount of worms occupying the material as I pull it aside to make room for the feeding, there's a good number of worms in here, possibly more than what we observed in the other bin. Another chunk of corn cob right there. So this bin is very nice in terms of how it's coming along. Like I said, scraps of newspaper, but not much. They've definitely done a good job breaking down the newspaper that they were given as bedding to go in hand with their feeding. So hopefully they'll appreciate this paper that they're getting today. These paper towel bits. Yeah, it's about the same. I think, yeah, we gave the other bin one extra. This is just 2 sheets, but they're still stuck together through the perforation. I'm not going too crazy tearing this stuff apart because the worms are going to do that for me anyway. I don't have to break it into small tiny bits. The worms will tear it to shreds in no time. And then in goes what remains of our feeding portion for today. Almost making me think that it's not too different from the last feeding they received a week ago, or 8 days ago actually. Just from the point of view that, you know, amount-wise, it's not very much. And once again, we've got a little squirmy worm trying to get out of the bin. Stay in the bin, buddy. We're almost done. Don't be so anxious to leave. We'll cover things up here and let you get back to your privacy momentarily. All I want to do is get some grit in here and the last of the food, and we can cover right up. Okay. So here, I guess to supplement the one less paper towel, we're going to tear up this coffee filter. And now it's kind of an even distribution of paper products, carbon-based food items to go hand in hand with the fruits and veggies that they're being fed. So, let's get this thing covered up and we're done. You know, in this bin I'm questioning whether I want to... I'm always so tempted to take some of this old leafy material and dump it down into the feeding area where I know it's going to get a lot of attention. But I kind of have this affinity for having sort of a natural looking material covering the top of my bins. And if you're a regular here, you'll know that already by now. So I do like to try to preserve some of this leafy material, to spread it out across the top to give the bin a somewhat natural appearance while I still can. Oops, we forgot to place some of these old food items down into the feeding area. Let's see if we can take care of that before we get too far along here. Just a couple of these slow composting items. Definitely helps to have them down where the action's going to be, otherwise they get neglected. But that's about it, you know. One thing we didn't do in the other bin, and I don't even know if we're going to bother here. Yeah, maybe we'll take a quick peek. Sometimes I just like to take a look on the outer edges of the bins just to see how things are progressing over there. And I don't think we did it in the other bin, but maybe we'll just take a peek here, especially since this is the older bin. And probably the more heavily populated bin. I got a feeling we're going to be driving this container to harvest a little bit quicker than the other container that we just fed. Not quite as much action out here on the edges as we saw down the middle, which is not too surprising considering that the feedings are being placed down the middle, and with that usually the majority of the moisture that's being added to the bins. Since I don't really add a lot of moisture, I just rely on the foods that are being placed into the bin to be the moisture supply for the bin. But I can't say that it's, you know, dangerously dry. This side's a little bit more damp than the other side was, and as a result, we've got a few more worms hanging out here. And the material is just so nice. Coming along really good. Just can't wait to see a lot of these leaf stems start to break down and come a little bit further along and get us a little bit closer to the finish line. So we're definitely starting to run out of leaves here. Every time I shove them aside and try to bring them back, they, you know, invariably end up mixed in with the rest of the bedding. And that is ultimately the game plan here, is for all this stuff to get broken down. But for as long as I can, I try to preserve this nice natural appearance out on the top surface using leaves or some sort of natural material. And then at some point that'll all go away, and then we'll be starting to drive towards harvest. So we're pretty much done here. I've just got a little bit of covering up to do, and then I got a few things to clean up, but I'm not going to keep you around for that. That's boring. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Bye now.